Okay, so our next speaker is Ola Hnatiuk. She's a professor at the Center for East European Studies at the University of Warsaw. She is also visiting professor at the Kiev-Mohyla Academy. Her main research interests are in the 20th century East European history and culture. Her most recent publications include Farewell to Empire, Pożegnanie z Imperium, published in 2003, and the Ukrainian translation in 2005. Also Between Literature and Politics, essays and interludes, Між літературою і політикою, essay Ta intermedii, published in 2012, and the most recent work published this year, Courage and Fear, Відвага і страх, Odwaga і страх.
First of all, thanks for kind invitation, and I will jump to 20th century, which is my specialization, but you should know I am not historian. Therefore, I am just a philologist, so I will pay attention mostly on narratives. I think that you will understand why. My remarks are on asymmetry of national narratives, and they are based on the 20th century Polish-Ukrainian relations. My primary interest as a scholar and as social activist has been historical acts of contemporary opportunities for Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation. In concentrating my research on efforts to achieve Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation, I have never doubted the legitimate conflicts, and I never disregarded various conflicts of interests of the protagonists. I have attempted, however, to demonstrate that reducing the history of Polish-Ukrainian relations to the various difficult questions falsifies our image of reality. My perspective is particular not because of my heritage, but thanks to a particular experience. Born in Warsaw for almost 10 years, now I have been living in Kiev, and for the past 5 years teaching Polish history at an Ukrainian university and Ukrainian history at a Polish university. For a while now, I have been convinced that it is precisely the limited perspective allowed by national narratives and not a territorial conflict that lies at the foundation of the Polish-Ukrainian conflict and makes reconciliation really difficult. I also understand that many historians do not take narrativism seriously, or even deny that the narrative turn makes a difference in historical research. Additionally, I understand that many specialists who focus on reconciliation believe that the basis for such reconciliation can only be established when facts are established first, and only then would it be narrative it would be time for agreements and how to interpret those facts. However, the role of those facts in a national narrative differs, and so do their interpretations. I do not intend to prove here that the territorial conflicts do not matter. However, I believe that at their core lies a conflict of two identities, and one of them tends to be the dominant one. Each of these identities relies on a completely different narrative. Equally, I do not wish to prove that Polish and Ukrainian historians cannot agree on facts. On the contrary, on this level, details accepting, there is no discrepancies. My goal is to search for an answer to the question of what makes Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation difficult. And in my brief analysis of national narratives, I will limit myself to a few recent popular textbooks, mostly for universities' purpose. And I will take a look on 4 examples. One, it is the Alliance of 1920. The second is Promethean idea, and the third is Fight for Lviv, and the fourth is the conflict during World War II. So, starting with the Alliance of 1920. When it comes to the interwar period, the catalogue of discrepancies begins already with terminology. We can recall terms such as Małopolska Wschodnia, Kresy Wschodnie, and as well as Zahidno-Ukraińskie Zemlje, and commonly used acronym ZUZ, or Western Ukraine, and finally after November 1st, 1939, also Західні області Української СССР. But it is no less important at the narrative level to bring us those terms which used to stir up the most emotions and continue to do so still. Civilizing mission, Polish occupation. We should note that these examples cement the state of war and do not recognize to even the most minor degree that another national narrative has equal status. Moreover, even the notion of occupation, zajmanszczyna, okupacja, served as a premise to justify violence. First, it was acts of terror and then ethnic cleansing against the alleged occupier. On the other hand, those who participated in the so-called civilization mission, or Polish civilization mission, considered themselves to have the right to use forcible measures against those to be civilized, namely Polonized. Such discrepancies could easily become the focus of a major study. However, here I will direct my focus at the Piłsudski-Petlura Alliance, in Ukrainian referred to as the Treaty of Warsaw or Warsaw Convention. Both terms appear neutral. The first acknowledges that the two leaders entered an alliance. The second makes a reference to the location in which the treaty was signed. And it means that whose primary interest was being served. The Polish interpretation of events emphasizes the military significance of this alliance for the victory, Polish, of course, victory over the Bolsheviks. One rarely mentions the role of the Ukrainian ally in the miracle of at the Vistula, Cud nad Wisłą. Consistently omitted is the significance of the Riga Peace Treaty signed in March 1921, and the significance for the ally. Completely separately, as it without any connection with the points of this treaty, one depicts the fate of the interned army and Petlura himself. Although it is known that in Riga the Polish side made a commitment to hand Petlura over to Bolsheviks. In the eyes of Ukrainians, the 1920 alliance was not a difficult brotherhood. Galician Ukrainians, as well as politicians, to name only Hrushevsky, considered the agreement a betrayal of national interests, and some went so far as to call it a crime, quotation, crime for which Ukraine has paid with the freedom and the blood of its sons, Mr. Sheluhin. These discussions took place until the end of interwar period. For instance, Ivan Kedrin-Rudnitsky claimed that the Riga Peace Treaty amounted to a betrayal by the Polish sides by the Polish side of its ally, while Leon Wasilewski rejected this interpretation. And it is just to bring up opinions of two persons who favored reconciliation. Let us omit the clearly negative assessment of the agreement as an indication of Polish imperialism, which was required in Ukraine during Soviet times, and look at contemporary views of the matter. In current Ukrainian narratives, and negative assessments of the agreement still dominates. The opinions are united when it comes to evaluating the political concept. The treaty as anti-Russian. But one's judgment of this perspective depends on one's world view. For some, it is positive. Those who are pro-Russian, it has a negative view. However, the most common is a stereotypical understanding introduced during Soviet times. The treaty signified a ruthless exploitation of the Ukrainian peasants. And to be fair, we should remember that the Kiev offensive began at the end of April, and the army turned around already in early June, thus 2 months prior to harvest. Finally, perhaps the most important matter, specifically the historical meaning of the Treaty of 1920 in both national narratives. Researchers of this episode may not agree with me, but even a superficial look at academic textbooks reveal this event to be utterly marginal in the Polish national narrative in general and in history textbooks in particular. For instance, in Polish grade textbooks, which in the course of a few years has undergone 3 editions already, doesn't mention the treaty's name, even the treaty's name, and the Kiev offensive merits only one short sentence. From independence to independence, od niepodległości do niepodległości. The same is true for example, Serhii Yekelchik textbook, Ukraine, Birth of a Modern Nation. Of course, in the history of Ukraine by Yaroslav Hrycak, this treaty is very long passage and very, very interesting. The asymmetry of in contemporary narratives reveals itself in the central events that build up national pride. For Poles, it is the miracle at Vistula, Cudo nad Wisłą, in 1920, while for Ukrainians it is the Peace of Brest, which is recognized Ukrainian sovereignty. And the second example, the Promethean idea. While the alliance of 1920, regarded very differently by each side, remains on the margins of both national narratives, the Promethean idea, liberation of nations oppressed by USSR under Polish leadership, is utterly absent there. In Polish interpretation, an idea of solidarity with conquered nations, it is a mission or a kind of mission. In the beginning of the 30s, very few political analysts would uncover an inherent contradiction within the Polish policy. A distant vision of independent Ukraine cannot replace attempts to find a real solution to the Ukrainian problem within the borders of Republic of Poland. And what is the Promethean idea in the eyes of Ukrainians? In contemporary Ukrainian education, the notion of Promethean idea itself is associated exclusively with Shevchenko romantic poetry, the poem Kaukaz, as well as the neo-romantic poetry by Lesia Ukrainka. A few Ukrainian publications dealing with the Promethean idea often equaled it with Jagiellonian idea, which in turn provokes association with Polish expansionism. And of course, it is not without some influence of Russian interpretation. While we are on the subject, it is worth mentioning that almost 1/3 on NKVD materials, Orientировka, depicting the political landscape of Republic of Poland were devoted precisely to the Promethean circles. The third example, the Battle of Lviv. In contrast with the marginal treatment of the 1920 treaty and the absence of the Promethean idea in national narratives, both of which are examples of the cooperation between political elites, although differently evaluated, the Polish-Ukrainian War of 1918 and 1919 occupies an important place in national narratives. I will skip this fragment, this piece, because today Slavko told us about this conflict and its resolving. However, one just remark. The pre-war cult of Orlęta aimed to lower the status of Ukrainian inhabitants who were not regarded as co-citizens but only as defeated side. The victors followed the credo, the victis. The Ukrainian population in Galicia stored in their memory the humiliation of national pride. During the interwar period, November 22 was designated as an officially and ceremonially celebrated holiday. The rocznica wyzwolenia Lwowa, Lwów Liberation Anniversary. For that reason, the remembrance of Orlęta to this day provokes strong emotions, as evidenced by the conflict surrounding the cemetery of Orlęta, which lasted for more than a decade. This conflict was resolved only in June 2005, at the beginning of Yushchenko's presidency, although its resolution is still being undermined on both sides of the border. And last example, the Polish-Ukrainian conflict during World War II. And of course, the most serious discrepancies between two national narratives. They occur in references to World War II. Just to list them would exceed the limits of my talk, so I will just try to conclude. It is common for a national narrative to focus attention on martyrdom of the nation. Among post-communist nations, it is characteristic to concentrate on topics previously excluded due to communist censorship. Both these tendencies have significantly altered the image of World War II. And results of the research conducted by Pentor Research, commissioned by the new established Museum of World War II, surprised even the director, Paweł Machcewicz. It turned out that in the memory of Poles, Ukrainians were the predominant perpetrators when it comes to the suffering Polish people experienced during World War II. And while there were errors in interpreting the data, Machcewicz's statement quickly became common knowledge. And when it comes to data from the same research about nations that suffered the most as a result of World War II, there is no error in interpretation. It is the Poles who place at the top, next are the Jews, and then the Russians, after them the Germans, the Gypsies. And Ukrainians are on the 7th place. Neither Polish nor Ukrainian losses in World War II have been counted correctly thus far. However, if we should accept the official data, the loss of human life in the Polish Republic of Poland equaled 5.6 millions. In the Ukrainian SSR, 9 million. Once again, we see proof that national narratives are premised on the martyrdom of your own nation, understood solely in ethnic categories. The constant discussions that surround World War II prove that its image continues to evolve. In which way, I am afraid I will not be able to say now, maybe during the discussion. And I should say that debates surrounding the classification of Volhynia massacre as genocide in 2013 after the parliamentary resolution and the term ethnic cleansing with traits of genocide. Also, the other notion was introduced. It is genocide atrox, genocide of particular cruelty. And it is not very common in public debate, but it exists and have a place. Logical consequences of such a World War II narrative is to conclude that in addition to the German genocide committed on the Jews of the Republic of Poland, the Volhynia territory suffered a genocide of the Poles as well as mass murders committed by the Soviet and German occupiers. And the focus is directly on Volhynia massacre. Not on the murders committed by Soviet and German occupiers. As you will remember, the double genocide theory, a comparison of murders committed by Germans and by Soviet occupiers, has brought a charge of seeking to relativize the Holocaust. I should say that among structural omission in the Polish World War II narrative is the history of the population of territories absorbed into the Third Reich, and it is the other question. It is really problem, this Polish-centric image of World War II, as Marcin Kula said, is a logical consequences of the focus of one nation's suffering. And I should say that the Ukrainian situation is much more complicated, and I'm sorry, but I couldn't explain now. Maybe during the discussion why I think so. And to conclude, I would like to say that in the past decade, history teachers at schools and the university in both countries have exhibited opposing tendencies. On the one hand, there are ambitious projects that aim to create a new model of teaching history which integrates. On the other, the model of teaching mono-ethnic history supported by the states carries on. The first model, for example, project of Natalia Yakovenko, or a project of supranational history by Kasyanov, or a textbook Multi-ethnic Ukraine, prepared by Ukrainian Association of History Teachers, they are not so common. And consequently, the other narrative, the ethnocentric narrative, is predominant. And I believe that Serhiy Plokhy will say us what next about how to teach history in 21st century and how to avoid mono-ethnic narratives, and how to change this asymmetry between not only Polish and Ukrainian, but I think in our part of Europe, in East Central Europe, it is not only a problem of Ukrainian and of Ukrainians and Poles. Thank you for attention, for your patience.